All right, welcome back to Unschooled Theology. I'm one of your hosts, Derek, and with me is Evan. Hello, good day to you, sir.
Good day to you, sir.
All right, let's dive in here. We are still in Genesis 2:9, and will be for a couple more episodes. So let's read it real quick. And out of the ground, the Lord God made to spring up every tree that is pleasant to the sight and good for food. The tree of life was in the midst of the garden, and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Mhm.
All right, so last episode we talked about the significance of trees, and I was toying with in this episode trying to squeeze in what we're going to talk about, as well as some specific thoughts about the tree of life and some specific thoughts about the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And I realized that's probably too much to fit all into one episode. I think each of those deserves their own episode. So this is going to be a short, quick one. In theory, I don't know. We extend it out at times.
Yeah.
But in theory, it'll be a short, quick one where I want to just highlight the idea of these two trees and sort of some characteristics they share and why it sort of makes sense for these two to be paired together in this way. And so we talked about trees being this idea of something that reaches from the earth towards the heavens, right? Mm-hmm. And I think there's perhaps no two things which we as humans and the earth as a whole, this material world as a whole, there's nothing we more clearly reach to the heavens for than these two things, than what these two trees represent here. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So as has been established many times here, in these opening chapters, this opening chapter and a half of the Bible, mm-hmm. God, who resides in heaven, we reach towards heavens, is the source of life, right? And so as humanity and all the earth, we reach like the tree to the heavens for life. Mm-hmm. That is something that we do. The same, though, I think is true for the knowledge of good, of what is good and what is bad, and really evil. I think we'll get to it, maybe a bit of an over translation, but it's more like what is good and what is bad or not good. And in other words, morality is what that is, right? And we understand, I think we do understand, it makes sense that if there is a thing that exists that is morality, it can't originate in the earthly. It must be sought in the heavens. It must be found in the spiritual, in the divine. And so for both, life and the idea of morality, we reach to the heavens for those things.
Interesting. And what we're the word that comes to mind for me as you're talking about morality is judgment. Is that's what the knowledge of good and evil is to have proper judgment.
Well,
as somebody who,
I think it's a little different. To have proper judgment is to then choose correctly between those two, but you have to have knowledge of it first.
Yeah. Yes. The other word that comes to mind is wisdom. Is we would oftentimes look at someone who can discern something like that, mm-hmm. as being wise. And what we oftentimes seek is a wise judge.
Right.
Is somebody who can properly assess something and understand what is correct.
Yeah.
In both directions too. I think both in the going into a situation, you want somebody who can judge with wisdom what is the correct choice to make going forward, and then retroactively be able to say what was right and what was wrong. And
right.
I mean, oftentimes we think of judgment as being the punishment side of it, but there's also the going into it side of it too.
Yes, for sure. Sure. Yeah.
That's interesting. And then we look outside of ourselves, looking towards heavens for that, because that is mm-hmm. a problem that we oftentimes aren't able to solve, which is
we can't find the
people
answer
who
here,
appear to have a better understanding of it than us.
Yeah.
That's why we look to people and say that they're wise and have a real respect for people who appear to have that.
Right.
Some degree of wisdom.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. All right. So also the placement here of these trees in the middle of the garden, that carries some symbolic significance as well. since it shows a level of importance.
Mhm.
That which is in the center, we often understand to be the most important thing, right? That which is in the middle. So also, we might, particularly with the idea of a garden, in a garden, the way a garden is often laid out, the rest of the garden serves that which is in the center.
Mhm.
And the easiest way to think of this is, oftentimes we will see in a garden in the center something like either a gazebo,
Mhm.
or we might find a statue or a fountain, or some artwork or
Or a
something,
really
right?
big tree.
Or a
If you go to
really
some
big
of those,
tree.
if you go
Sure.
to
Yeah.
some of those southern
Yep.
gardens and like cities and stuff like
Yep.
that, like Savannah, Georgia, or something like that,
Mhm.
a lot of times you have these gardens.
A big old
Gazebos are
tree.
very problem, or a really big, giant,
Yeah.
beautiful tree that's hundreds of years old.
Right. But the rest of the garden is cultivated in a way where it sort of provides the context that supports that thing which is in the middle.
Yeah, and draws
right?
attention to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what we might think of, thinking about, again, this idea of order and a garden having order, is that all of order supports, in a way, and also builds itself out around these two central ideas. So all of the order that God has in humanity is built around the idea of life and morality. And these are the two central components. But then also at the same time, as we build in support of that, those things, work outward towards everything as well, everything else as well, so it's kind of a symbiotic relationship, but those are the two central aspects of what humanity should build around, should create gardens around: life and morality.
Yeah.
So and then the pairing of the two together is also interesting, because there's a level of implying equal importance to these two things, right? So the idea that life without morality is not enough. And obviously you have to, have life for morality to have meaning. So, but
to function, yeah.
Right. But life alone, without the morality, without the other tree, that's not enough. We need both.
Yeah.
That's why both trees exist. Both are in the center of the garden.
Yeah.
And we see this idea sort of reaffirmed later in the story, where expulsion from the garden and access to the tree of life is restricted from a lack of morality. Right. And so that is reaffirming this idea that life without morality is not really life.
Yeah, I think there's a way in which, and I know we'll get more into the meaning of the trees in another episode, but there's a way in which that's intuitive for people. I think all people. I don't think I'm often generalizing that too much. But by saying that, look, just to simply breathe every day is not significant.
Yeah.
That purpose is a thing that we seek out. And so morality, we won't get, again, we're not going to get too much into the trees, but it feels like a further support of saying, look, just the tree of life is not enough.
Yeah.
The knowledge of good and evil seems to get closer to that idea of purpose and significance. And so just having the one is really intuitive to people, that, hey, this isn't the only thing that you need, and I think it's easy to look at people. I think people do more looking out at somebody and saying this than saying it internally to themselves, but looking out at other people and saying, look, you're fine, you're breathing, you've got your needs taken care of.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, no, but that's very clear to everybody that that's not the only thing. And I think that's further supported here.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of pairing going on in this, section of this chapter. It relates to what we talked about previously, the idea of nourishment and beauty, and that you need both. And here it's like, well, you need life and morality. There's purpose, like you're saying, is sort of built out of the combination of those two. And we could argue purpose is sort of built out of the idea of nourishment and beauty as well, right? Producing those paired things. So there is a lot of that kind of life is not, or man's purpose is not just like this one thing.
Exactly.
There's components here that are need to exist in sort of balance with each other.
Yeah. And one is fundamentally more esoteric than the other, I think.
Yeah.
The beauty or the knowledge of good and evil is fundamentally more difficult to put your hands on. And so I know there's a tendency and a desire to just put our hands on, yeah, but and it's maybe more of a functional perspective of, look, functionally, if life is continue living, that's the success. Or
Yeah.
if you are
Yeah.
nourished, you're that's the success. We're done, right? That's the only thing. And the other one is far more vague and abstract and difficult, as spiritual things tend to be to humans.
And debated, right?
Yes, yes.
But it's interesting too, and we, though, as Christians would argue there is something of an objective morality,
Mm-hmm.
and we might not know exactly what it is, but it's there and it exists,
Mm-hmm.
and we know bits and pieces of it. We know elements God has revealed, to us of it. We know fundamentals of it, but it's a thing that, is real and exists.
Yeah, yeah.
And I would argue, I actually think the same is true of beauty too, in some sense.
Mm-hmm.
And we might not always know it in the moment, what is truly beautiful, but I think what is really beautiful ends up sort of standing the test of time in a way. And something I use an example is Beethoven's Fifth or Ninth, where you'd find it hard pressed to find people over the course of history who would argue that that's not beautiful, those works.
Mm-hmm.
And you'll find some, but for the most part, it seems that over the course of time that has emerged to be beauty. And there were many artists, composers in the between period between Beethoven and today that may have had more popularity in a moment,
Mm-hmm.
but perhaps we're not creating works of objective beauty because they didn't stand the test of time in that way.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's same kind of thing, right? Like there is this objective beauty out there, but I don't know that we quite can define it, right? Just as we would say there is this objective morality out there, but we can't quite define it. We know elements of it. We know elements of what maybe applies to objective
Mm-hmm.
beauty, but
Mm-hmm.
we can't quite pull it all together, if that makes sense.
Correct. And I think you can even go into the more abstract, and say that music has the tendency to be beautiful, and that the experience
At
of
times.
music has the tendency to be beautiful. Well, and that and that harmony, it's something fundamentally that only humans experience and are enticed by. That the creation of a pitch and then the creation of another pitch and them somehow meshing in a strange way, it's exciting to humans, and it's not exciting to anybody else. And so you can
music might be an example.
The particular thing as being a particular example of it as being fundamentally beautiful. There is just the general subject of, for some reason, music is beautiful.
Right. And I guess that's what I mean about knowing the fundamentals, right? We've sort of discovered, we know kind of the fundamentals of morality, but maybe not the exact perfect moral behavior in every circumstance. We understand the fundamentals of music. That's why we have notes that are, these set vibrations, right? And these scales that are these set
so the
order of those notes, right? So we know the basics. It doesn't mean every time we use it exactly correctly to produce the most beautiful thing.
Correct.
But we have a rough idea, of what it's somewhere in this realm, right? And I think the same is true of morality. It's like, well, it's somewhere in this realm.
Correct.
We know these basic fundamentals, but we also know that we can't behave perfectly moral, just like we can't always produce something beautiful, even if we know all of the technical aspects of music theory.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, and then there's this I think beauty, is a response to beauty, is this strange sort of stirring up that goes on within a person that appears to be reflexive. It's not necessarily exactly controlled by the individual. It's a response to something. You see it and you're like, wow, that was beautiful. And there's and in the same way that we have respect for the, let's say, the abstracted wise judge, like I keep thinking of, let's say, the wisdom of Solomon. Like we have a respect for that wells up, because it's like, wow, that's somebody who's able to perceive in good and evil in a particular type of
they
way.
seem to be able to compose the music well.
Exactly. So we have the same response to particular people who are able to compose that, or particular pieces that are composed in a way that tend to incite that response of just this reflexive response of, this is beautiful. And it just is beautiful. It's agreed. And there's also, it's a long drawn out process. I think the harmony is a good example, because harmony wasn't invented overnight. It was a long drawn out process of thousands of years.
These fundamentals of music were discovered over time, very slowly,
Exactly. Which is the same if in let's say with visual arts as well. Is you have a long progression of discovering how to make something and mix colors in a proper way to present something that's beautiful.
Yes. And you have, why not? Let's go further down this path. It's been a shorter episode anyways. Weirdly too, you have in both, sort of fine arts, if you will, or something, as well as music, you reach this point too, where you have things that are created specifically to reject those ideals.
Correct.
You have music that is meant to be not following these sort of things we've discovered, and we have art that is specifically, rebelling against sort of the patterns and formulas we've sort of discovered to be, the foundations of being beautiful. And that's something worth thinking about. I don't think I can fully explore the significance of that right now, but I do think there's something to that relates to the idea of morality too, and people that desire to rebel against morality merely for the sake of rebelling against it. Exactly. And there is the same thing that happens in regards to what is beautiful too. They reject it merely to reject it.
It doesn't seem, and the intent is important there, because there's oftentimes missteps in especially creative acts to attempt to try to find something or find something else, let's say. And then there are ones that are intended to reject the premise that this is good. And to say, why does this have to be defined as good? And it's like, well, I don't know, but it makes
but it is.
And say, I don't know. I don't know why the Sistine Chapel is beautiful, but people tend to walk in there and just kind of be flabbergasted. And it's like, I don't know, humans are weird, but that's kind of the point of what we're exploring right now. That is something that's just inside of us, and it's a strange thing.
Church steeples,
Agreed. Yeah, exactly.
Which, that form has been used long before it was used as a church steeple as well.
Exactly.
But it's people find it beautiful, for whatever reason. They just do,
Well, and this I think connects to modern worship, because I see a contingency. A lot of people. There are a lot, especially people who function within, who get deeper into, let's say, producing worship music or creating worship music. The big complaint that you hear a lot of times is they say it's manufactured to create an emotional response. Which I understand maybe being repulsed by that, but at the same time, it's like, well, so is a beautiful painting. So is the Garden of Eden. The trees were produced to create a pleasing sight. Like, so if your music is created in a way that intends to create an emotional response or some sort of incitement of beauty, it's like, don't use that manipulatively. That's an improper use of it. But if it's created in order to incite an emotional response, well, what do you think worship music is for?
Yeah, if you're using it,
what do you think music is for?
If you're using it for selfish gain, then that becomes the problem, right?
Correct.
Which I can understand how some people look at. I'll leave out the controversy of naming any right now, but let's just say some modern what'd you say?
Joel Osteen.
Oh, well, no, yeah, Joel Osteen, but I'm thinking of worship music specifically, and
Okay,
some of
you want to
those
go
that
deeper into that. Okay, yeah.
some of those groups that produce
More
it at the moment, yeah, some of the groups that produce it at the moment, I think it is reasonable to look at those groups and say, I question your motives a little bit, right?
Which is fair. I think that's the critique that should be issued.
Though. Yeah.
Because
if you are trying to bring people to
that.
God with it, that's different, you know. And if you're trying to lift yourself up, then that's an issue. And I think let's just say that line is, and I'm not, you know, I would like to say too, I think that probably is a hard line to walk too, right? And that's probably tough, but I think there are probably some groups that we could look at and say, you've probably crossed over the line a little bit. Yet at the same time, I don't know that entirely discredits the music or the songs, right? Because as soon as we start rejecting songs and music made by flawed people, we've lost music. There's no music, right? It's created by flawed people. So you know, it's hard to say there what to really, you know, do with that. But
the tools that are oftentimes used to combat that too are tools of restraint, of saying don't overplay. I think with worship music, that's the tool that's used frequently, is don't overplay on a guitar solo or something like that. Like, and you don't see that in modern worship music. And that's where it's like, I mean, there are times where musicians tend to make a big distinction between gospel music and contemporary worship music, because gospel music very clearly doesn't follow those ideas. It tends to encourage overplaying or encourage creativity, encourage going out on a whim. And it's not always, I mean, in those circles, it's not, I mean, players are respected, but there's also, it's not viewed as being arrogant. It's viewed as being a part of this experience, and it is a communal experience.
Well, I think
even if one person is just
that's you said the right word there. That was the key word, is communal.
Yeah,
there's a line, I think, between performative and like it being very like a participative act.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And in a lot of, you know, the gospel music where it might have those things you're talking about, it is still very clearly like that is the audience, the whole group there is participating in it, you know. So even if there are the parts of it that are sort of going out on their own and doing something, you know, experimental or different, or an emphasis placed on something for a moment of time, it doesn't necessarily take away from the fact that it is truly, you know, a participative thing. Whereas I think there are times where the worship music can cross over to the line of being performance, you know.
Exactly.
And by the way, where that line is, I think may depend on the congregation too, you know. I think if you try to go into like a real old school, you know, old school Baptist, you know, hymn book church with even too much instrumentation or whatever, that would look mild in a different church. That would be so foreign to those individuals in that congregation that it becomes a performance rather than participative, even though that same thing would be participative in a different church and not a performance. So I think it may be a congregation by congregation thing as well too. But I think that's the key line that we would draw there. So I didn't expect us to break into some theories on worship music out of these two trees, but apparently we ended up there. So hey, that's good. Wherever it leads. All right, so we are going to look at these two trees a little bit closer, particularly the prohibition and later violation of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. I don't know. I'm toying with whether I want to do a specific episode on each of them now or wait till we get to that in the narrative. So I will figure that out between now and the next episode. So we may be back to the trees, or we might just move on to the next part and deal with that when we get a little bit closer to it, which I think I'm leaning towards that now, actually, after this discussion. So all right, let's wrap it up there, and be sure to like, subscribe, review, thumbs up, rumble us on Rumble. I think that's what they call it over there. All those things. Comment, shoot us an email, unschooledtheology@protonmail.com. And yeah, if you have any friends who you think would enjoy this or be enraged by it, we'll take the hate listens, We're not opposed to that. So yeah, let them know. And we'll be back soon. And thank you for listening in.